pulled up during the pandemic, so that sales, although the market was falling apart, online sales more than doubled in 2020. And even though online sales shrank, the growth in the market last year meant they kept growing. So they're now over 13 billion. So it's been amazing to watch. And I think it's definitely an outcome of the pandemic that it's forced a kind of a compulsory kind of catch up for the art market. So it's now more or less on the level of other industries in terms of its share of e-commerce. So that's been a really interesting thing to watch as well. The auction sector is the other kind of piece of the puzzle that I put in. You know, and obviously it's more complex than ever because private sales are such an important element of what auctions do now as well. The auction sector had a couple of difficult years in 2019 and 2020, but obviously saw a really strong recovery in 2021. And then this year is going to, you know, with those, you know, 1.5 billion in one sale and things like that, it's obviously going to be a strong year as well. And really driving that top grey squiggly line is the 10 million plus segment that really influences the aggregate figures in the auction sector that I look at so much. So it kind of causes the ups and downs. A very small amount of sales can cause the ups and downs in the market over time. And I mean, it shot up, you can see, in 2021, and it's going to keep on going. I mean, I think there was 5 works, wasn't there, for over 100 million in that Paul Allen sale. So that's going to, I think that line is going to keep on going up in 2022. But it's been an interesting one to watch. And driving that as well is what's been happening with high net worth wealth. So what's happening at the high end of collecting is pivotal for that 10 million plus segment. And I think this is what's really interesting with the last few years. It's not like the global financial crisis where, you know, billionaire wealth dropped about 50%. In the last few years, billionaire wealth has actually grown. And this is from March to March. But if you look at from March 2020 to the end of the year, in 2020, billionaire wealth grew by something like 40% or about a third, I think it was. And it's kept on growing. And even despite a little bit of a kind of a fall down this year, which is mainly, to be honest, caused by Russia and China, a drop in billionaires in both of those regions for obvious reasons in Russia. It has still, you know, from 2019 to the present, billionaire wealth has grown by nearly half its size again. So it's an amazing thing to watch. And that's definitely 100%. Not all these people are collectors, but it's definitely helping the high end of the market, which drives a lot of the aggregate figures that I look at. We also check in directly with high net worth collectors. So we just released a few weeks ago a survey, and I've been working with UBS doing these surveys of high net worth individuals for the last 7 years. And we really started kind of the biggest one ever. There was nearly 3,000 respondents to the survey. And these are all high net worth collectors across 11 different markets. And it's amazing to see that despite everything that's been going on for the last few years, these people are reporting their spending going up and up and up. And this is the median spend. And you can see that in the first half of this year, it's not only bigger than it was in 2021, but also bigger than it was pre-pandemic into 2019. And we actually asked them to forecast their spending for the rest of the year. And I mean, people's plans don't necessarily materialize, but you can see the strength of optimism that they have in the art market. What they're buying is really interesting as well. You know, there's a huge amount of talk about digital art and NFTs and things, but digital art is actually still a relatively small component of what people are buying in the first half of the year. In 2022, 17% of spending was on digital art, and 10% of that is related to NFTs. But paintings and sculptures and works on paper, the kind of traditional sectors, are still some of the biggest components of what people are buying. I'm not going to talk too much about NFTs because I know there's another masterclass tomorrow about it, but this has been a huge, really interesting thing. And these sales that we're tracking with non-fungible, this is all happening outside of the art market. So this is a whole nother, it's not in my pie, it's in a separate pie, but it's really been fascinating to watch. I mean, it's gone from about 5 million when you're talking about art and collectible sales on these external NFT platforms in 2019 to 11 billion in 2021. This is with art and collectibles. Art-related NFTs were about 3 billion. And then obviously this huge fall off in the beginning of this year as Ethereum went down. And obviously it's a fascinating market to watch, but hugely speculative and some really interesting data that I've been looking at, especially about things about the turnaround of sales on NFT platforms. I mean, the time from purchase to reselling is around a month in 2021, whereas if on the traditional kind of my old art market, it's 30 years or something. That's the average turnaround. So it's a very, very different marketplace going on in parallel, but hugely interesting. And I mean, I wouldn't, you know, even though you can see it going down, the market now on these NFT platforms is still, you know, more than double the size it was in 2020 and a huge amount more than it was ever before. So they certainly haven't disappeared by any stretch. Looking ahead, when we talk to collectors, everyone is very enthusiastic about events and travel again. You can see that at the fair. People are back, fairs are back. You know, most people are willing to attend events again, and you know, most people will go to them. The majority of people want to go to overseas events as well, and most people planning to buy and to sell art next year. And I think this is a really interesting component that, you know, overall in this survey that we did of high net worth collectors, the majority of people wanted to buy, but also nearly 39 or 40% wanted to sell as well. So there's a lot of activity going on in the art market, and certainly, although the pandemic has obviously had a huge effect on people's the way people interact, and it's changed the dynamics in some way in the art market, it certainly hasn't dampened any of the enthusiasm of collectors in the art market. So it's been another really interesting one to watch, and I'm fascinated now as I put the numbers together again for 2022 just to see where the market's going to go to next. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That was very illuminating. Lisa, on to you.
Hi, my name's Lisa Austin. I'm an art advisor, which many years ago used to be sort of a name that the galleries would shun. You know, oh my God, art advisor, here they come. And I think it's because we, as an industry, have become much more professionalized. And I think that art advising is quite different than maybe what it was when the whole idea first started. I have been doing this, well, I've had my own company for about 32 years. Prior to that, I worked for a large banking corporation in Miami that had a big collection. And I worked directly, happily and luckily, with Florence Knoll, who was married to the head of the bank at the time. And so I got a big education in architecture, art, and design from Florence Knoll. And then the bank had the bad taste to go out of business, taking all of my 401k with it and everybody else's. So I said, well, I think I'll just open my own business and see how that goes, and that was 32 years ago. It's changed a lot in 32 years, this industry. You know, I clearly remember walking up and down the streets of Soho, and it was a small market that everybody knew each other. I think you could walk into a gallery and see a show, even if it was a really sought-after artist, and you can come back the next day or the next day after that and take your time and make your decisions. And now it is a behemoth with so many buyers and so many people. And you know, you have to, the whole thing is just speeded up so much that you just have to make decisions very quickly and decide how you're going to approach each client and how you can quickly sort of give them an art history lesson in everything that you want to show them. And so we're looking at some images. They asked me to put some images together. This particular work by Sarah Lucas is in a sculpture garden that I put together for a client in Sagaponack. And he's sort of the perfect example of what maybe a client is right now. He's in private equity. He doesn't have the time to look into a lot of art. He's not going to do the footwork himself. He needs someone like me to kind of put it all together, give him an idea of what he, you know, maybe should be doing, especially with a sculpture garden. And so that's, you know, it's very helpful, I think, to have an art advisor take you through, you know, this giant industry and kind of guide you. So we're sort of a guide to the underworld, I should say. This is by Woody Diothello, who has last 2 years, I think, become really sort of an art market star. And this is a bronze work that is also in Sagaponack. You know, this I remember very clearly was at the Meridian section, and I think we had to fight off 3 people till I could get him to agree to it. I mean, at one point I think I was like standing in front of it and saying, no, no one else can have this work. Lisa Yuskavage. These are actually two very small, little wonderful portraits that I think were an interesting buy for someone rather than the giant Lisa Yuskavage paintings that people maybe get used to. This is kind of a wonderful part of his collection as well. Ugo Rondinone, this is a wax work that is also in this client's apartment in New York City. So you can see, I mean, there's a great wealth of, there's so many different works, there's so many different artists. I mean, how do you do it? How do you focus on the ones that you want to, you know, to present to each collector? It's kind of a giant puzzle. Simone Lee was very happy to buy that just as her career was starting to break out. And so very lucky to have gotten my hands on that particular work. Daniel Arsham. This is in a client's home. Had to be, you know, the wall had to be made specifically to accept this, which is very fun. It's rather ghostly at night. I would be a little afraid to have it. Mel Bachner, of course. I mean, he's sort of wonderful and rigorous and amusing at the same time, and people love his work. Wengeshi Mutu. Beautiful, incredible. I heard a talk by her once, and I was just completely blown away. She's so smart, and these are such dynamic, interesting works, and the surfaces, you know, how she puts them together is incredible. Ai Weiwei, Petrified Tree. This is in a client's home in Napa Valley. This is also in Sagaponack, Sanford Biggers, in the same client's home. And that's the same client's home in Ursula von Breidingsvard. So I had the best pictures of his home, so I just showed it. And that just gives you an idea of some of the works that I've placed in the last couple of years. You know, what does an art advisor do? I think what we are not is we are not dealers. We do not sell particular works of art. We do not represent artists. We have, through the Association of Professional Art Advisors, a code of ethics, and that is that everything that we do is financially transparent. So my clients know exactly how much I get paid. Generally, my clients pay me directly. We do not accept, you know, sort of both sides of the aisle payments. That's the way it's supposed to work. And there's no kind of rushing into a gallery and saying, I get this much, and, you know, everything is secret, and don't tell the client. Everything has to be completely clear and transparent. And so our job, I think a fiduciary maybe is too strong a word for it, but our responsibility is to our clients. But we also we have to be very respectful of our relationship with galleries. We do not abuse galleries. We try to work with them whenever we can. They're not our adversaries, you know, they're working with us for the best of our clients. But to be sure, we are working for the client. And so the best art advisors are the ones who are able to sleep at night, I think, you know, and everything is clean and clear. And so I think that art advisory has become quite a professional industry over the past few years. It's, you know, come from something sort of ad hoc into something quite serious, and it seems that there are many, many people in it now. I applaud that. I think a lot of people do need help with their collections, particularly very busy people, and our job is to understand the market, understand art history, understand what our client is looking for, and to guide them and help them and protect them whenever we can. So that is kind of the art advisor in a nutshell.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So, I'm curious, Lisa, how and why do typically people start collecting art?
Well, I mean, some people collect art because they go to a friend's home and they see all this art and they think, oh my goodness, you know, what is this and how do you know about this? And a lot of my clients have seen art through other collectors. Some people I have friends who are the kind of collectors that are just incredibly intellectually curious, and they want to know more about, you know, there's so much media about art, there's so much discussion, particularly when there's like a Paul Allen collection coming up. You know, there's so much that they want to learn about it, but I think that they're a little afraid to jump in. There's many different reasons, I suppose, but a lot of my collectors see it the homes of their friends.
So it's really then a social thing.
It is kind of social. I mean, hopefully it goes from social into the deep dive intellectually. I mean, that's sort of my job, is to guide them to that.
What kind of work do people most commonly collect? Painting, sculpture, what are their aims?
It's kind of all of the above. Honestly, it often starts out with, here's my new house, and I know I want to put wonderful things in it. I don't know where to begin, and so we kind of identify what their interests are. You know, you have to do sort of an educational session first. What have you seen? What museum shows have you gone to? What do you like? What interests you? What media? I mean, it is sort of all across the board: sculpture, paintings, video art. Works on paper, which, you know, people sort of dismiss. I love works on paper.
They're a kind of entry point, aren't they? Because
For some.
they're quite
for some.
low priced, yeah, compared to
Yeah,
painting, for
whether they're
example.
multiples or drawings. I mean, I just love works on paper. And what happens is, you know, you sort of start here, and then you move all the way here. So they may start as a beginner, and then over the years, as they become educated and they educate their eye, and we keep going to galleries and fairs, they get better and better. And so the better they get, the easier it is for me.
Claire, can you comment on that from a sort of macro perspective? Because your research also looks into different types of mediums.
Sure. It's interesting because I think paintings and sculpture still are the dominant in terms of that's where the value is. So from a macro perspective, the dominant mediums are still paintings and sculpture. And as we saw in the high net worth collectors survey, digital art is growing, but it's at a much lower price level. So from the macro figures end, it's still very much paintings and sculpture. But I think, you know, people, as Lisa is saying, people do get started in different areas. And I think one thing, you know, people read a lot about art, and that's how they get started as well. And I think it's one unfortunate thing is that the stuff that tends to be publicized all the time is obviously the multi-million-dollar works and everything like that. So I think people are nervous about thinking, if I haven't got you know, millions to spend, I can't get anything good. Whereas it's actually, you know, one of the most democratic markets there is. There is something at every single price point for people to enter into, and that's in all mediums, in paintings as well. But I think it's lovely to see in the fair here, especially, that just the dominance of painting. And the market's driven by scarcity, and uniqueness and scarcity still drive prices up. But it's a very, you can do all this econometric analysis of what's happening. It's also really driven by very fickle things, fashions and fads, and following different people and things like that as well. So all of the quants that you can do doesn't counteract the fact that things shift and things, you know, people's tastes change. And we've seen things like that, especially I work as well with antiques dealers and stuff. They've had a very rough couple of decades, but things are coming back again. You know, people are buying antiques again. Maybe only one, whereas people used to buy multiple pieces. But, you know, it's just the way people's homes are now and things like that as well. So things kind of cycle in and out. But you see at auction particularly, the stuff with a strong historical footprint tends to be the highest value. But, you know, at fairs and things, you do get that lovely primary market high-value stuff as well. So it's pretty diverse, but certainly paintings and sculpture are where the highest values are.
Which brings us to a question of what drives an artist's career. You know, what differentiates, say, an artist whose prices remain quite low and a steady level from an artist whose prices are here and then rise to incredible heights, either over a shorter or a longer period of time? I mean, Lisa, can you comment on that?
Yes. That's the danger zone for me. You know, I know that things do fluctuate greatly based on word of mouth fashion. I think that having an artist go through the roof at a very young age often works out to be not that great for the artist and often not that great for the collector. Certainly there are collectors in the short term that will make a lot of money on that. But galleries are quite worried about that, and I think rightly so. Because, you know, you can't take an artist who is really just beginning their career and, you know, suddenly have this massive market force, you know, put upon them, and how can they develop properly? You know, how can they continue? The pressure to just keep churning out more of the same to satisfy collectors is not good for them. And these, I mean, I've been doing this such a long time. these things really do ebb and flow. I have seen so many artists who were so important, collectible, every person had to have one, and literally 10 or 15 years later, they are not showing those artists. It's really bad for their career. So Larry Sims once told me, give an artist 10 years to, paint themselves out of graduate school. And I think that, you've got to give artists time to develop. So, but galleries you see today are quite concerned about that. They really don't like the flippers, and I definitely agree with that. That's not good for anybody.
Claire, part of your research that you mentioned earlier was looking into artists' careers. And so I was wondering about your take on this.
Well, I think it is a very, it tends to be a little bit of a winner-take-all superstar market. So I think that the people that do well, there's probably less differences based on kind of quality or talent. Some of it's just, it's what was fortunate to have a good gallery. And I think galleries do work with artists over their careers, whereas auction sales are driven by making a sale quickly. Galleries work in a very, very different way to the auction sector. But it does tend to be only a tiny, tiny portion of the artists that are around achieve any success at all, and it's less based on, if you could measure quality in some way, it's less based on that than good luck. And I think what tends to be the case is for collectors too, because it's such a large, infrequent purchase by people, one way for new collectors especially to reduce risks when they're buying is to just buy what successful people have bought before. And this kind of tends to evolve over time so that other artists tend to get a little bit forgotten about, and everyone's focusing on maybe 30 artists in any given year. Everyone's buying the same things. And I mean, it's really interesting, even this is for new artists, but also there's a lot of kind of boomer collectors now, say in the US, that have quite similar collections. The content of some of the collections is quite similar. So I'm always fascinated to think what will happen in 20 or 30 years, if they put these things up onto the market, there will be kind of quite a few similar pieces coming onto the market. But it's narrow focus in terms of who's doing well or who's getting the highest prices and who's achieving the most success. It's a very narrow focus, and it does tend to be that slight kind of herd mentality that people do just to reduce risk, is to follow what other people have been doing, which is difficult for artists starting out.
Well, it's the old adage of you shouldn't buy with your ears, you should be buying with your eyes, which, Lisa, you and I had a discussion about.
Yes, exactly. Buying with your ears is listening to every other person, saying, oh my God, this is the hot artist. And, my job is not to pump up someone else's market and make money for someone else's client. My job is to, sort of hold back and say, wait a minute, something that's estimated at 6,000 to 8,000 or 20,000 to 30,000 and is going for 500,000. The alarm bells should be ringing everywhere. Buying with your eyes is another world, and that means that you have educated your eye and you understand what you're looking at, and you've made some value judgments about where this artist's work is going, and how the right people supporting it, not necessarily collectors, but museums.
So museums, they're having museum shows, they're having shows at institutions as well. You go to, yeah.
Right, exactly. But if, the schemes where everybody, suddenly an artist becomes impossible to get and it's 10 times the value at auction, I mean, these are the kinds of things that I think tilt the art market the wrong way. And exactly as you say, then it becomes only 20 artists that everybody's talking about, and everybody else is sort of not paid attention to at all.
I mean, we do have some quite big tentpole trends driving the art market at the moment, I think. There's one sort of overlooked women artists from the 60s and 70s. We're seeing a lot of revival of surrealism. We're also seeing people like Carla Accardi, who was this almost unknown artist from the 1960s, Italian, who is now going for about $100,000 because of the Venice Biennial. So you have these moments in the art market calendar that really can drive certain artists into people's focus and attention. And then another key trend right now is African American and African figurative painting. There's a lot of interest there. You can also see it on the show floor. And so what I'm curious about is, how do you create a career in collecting? How do you drive longevity in collecting?
I think the boring and correct answer is that you have to educate yourself. You have to kind of do what I do, which is pound the pavement, get away from the screen, Go into galleries, talk to gallerists. That's free education, a gallery. They will talk to you about the artist's work in depth, and they're happy to do it. I think this idea that, it's so intimidating to walk to a gallery is not true. I mean, if you just ask, you will get tons of information. I do spend a lot of time reading the blogs and reading information and reading the Art Market Report. To give
Which
myself...
is free to download on the
Yes.
Art Basel website.
Which to give me context. But there is nothing that is better than going to museums, reading the labels, learning, and educating your eye. Because this is about, to me, I mean, it's wonderful if it's attractive and amazing and you feel emotional and passionate about it. But the intellectual part of it is critical. You have to understand what it is you're looking at and the why of why to buy this, the why of what the artist is doing. You can't do it, I don't think, without, the best collectors are all those who know a lot about the work that they're collecting, and not just, I don't remember the name of that artist, but my consultant got it for me. That's not where you want to be.
So it's kind of like really having this intimate relationship with the artists that you're interested in. Also, reaching out to artist studios, doing a studio visit so to understand the practice in more depth, not to be too shy, I think. Another key question is, obviously, we saw on Claire's slides that there's been a big shift in the market since the pandemic, that kind of upended the business. And I wondered from an art advisor's perspective, Lisa, how that impacted you and the way you related to your clients.
Well, in March of 2020, I thought we would be completely dead in the water all year long. And then I found out that my clients were also home and bored, and very bored, and on the phone. And I think what the galleries did was kind of smart. All of a sudden, I began getting tons of PDFs and sort of online fairs where all the galleries would get together and then just send out PDFs in sort of a virtual fair. And nothing ventured, nothing gained. We sent it to clients, and they were biting. So I had a great year in 2020. I could not have imagined that. They were very excited to do something. I mean,
It really
many
did.
works.
I think that really pulled the market out of the recession so quickly, is the speed of the reaction of galleries, because they were so behind in terms of their digital programs. I mean, if you look at the quality of kind of newsletters and stuff that I'm sure you get over the last couple of years, it ramped up so quickly. So they reacted quite quickly, and the ones that did okay, and the ones that were too slow and said, "Oh, we don't resell online," they are the ones that were a little bit left behind. But it was
Right,
the
I think
speed of
and the
turnaround.
young artists were the young galleries were on it.
Yeah.
They put together their own fair quickly and started sending things, which was fun.
They were used to the online segment. So I think, in that 2020, I think the larger galleries actually did worse year on year than some of the smaller galleries, which was a nice turnaround, because that never usually happens in my figures. It's always the other way around. So that was a nice change of events.
Before opening up to the floor, I just wanted to quickly touch on sales channels, because, what we've seen through also NFTs is that we have artists selling directly to collectors, and the rise of Instagram, for example, as a real sales channel. What is your experience there? Claire, maybe you can go first with the numbers.
Well, all the figures still point to, in terms of sales, that in my reports, that galleries make the most sales. But if you look at the high net worth collectors, the art market reports that I do only cover gallery and auction sales, so they're not capturing that huge segment that probably a lot of people buying directly from artists, people commissioning sales, and these artists selling directly, and not these NFT platforms that I put up earlier, which was the 11 billion last year. So there's a lot of activity going on outside what I do, but you can see from the high net worth collector surveys that they are using those channels, not as much as galleries, but there is a lot more disintermediation, I suppose, in the market than there used to be 20 years ago. And I think that's going to continue, because artists have become a little bit more savvy about their own careers. And there's a lot more advisors. The art advisors never show up that well in some of the research, but that's because, the final sale might not necessarily be through you, but you do all the back end.
Great, thank you so much. And I wanted now to open it up to the floor. So if you've got any questions, oh, wonderful. Lady, so we've got a roaming microphone, so please use the microphone. And maybe if you could tell us your name as well.
Hi, Jana Shea. This is my first time at the Art Basel. So I wanted to educate myself and came to this right away. I don't know much about the art world. Of all the things you said, I was interested in how much commissioning actually does happen. And is it when an artist gets hot, do they just not accept commissions anymore, or do they, or how does that work? Because I'm in theater, and we commission a lot of work with new writers and everything. So I'm curious.
Well, I mean, in the art world, we use commissioning, I think, in the sense of, you know, you hire an artist for a very specific project. That's a whole different sector of the art world. So I've done a lot of site-specific commissions with artists for different large projects, but I'm not sure how that sort of fits into the gallery world. I mean, I think commissioning is a separate kind of part of an artist's practice. And so, you know, as far as the art world, it's, you know, just creating art, I think, is what most artists do, and then, you know,
And
for
I mean,
themselves.
if you're a painter, you're not making that much work if you're working by yourself anyway. You're maybe doing 10 pieces a year. And so it actually comes into a situation where it's very difficult for collectors to access these paintings. You know, and then you have waiting lists, you have priority lists at different galleries, and their work just becomes very scarce, which is when you get this kind of effect that Lisa was talking about earlier, where you have this explosion in prices, but because there's not more work on the market, that makes it then very, you have the situation where you really have this high auction price because you can get work on the auction market versus a lower price through the galleries. So everyone wants to buy through galleries, but it's not possible. And that's when you have this white hot explosion. It becomes tricky for everyone involved. Does that answer your question? The gentleman.
Congratulations for the presentations. Very, very good. Just wanted to add that now we have Instagram, so people can connect directly with the artist, and sometimes they share their thoughts, and Instagram democratize the art world a lot.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of art stars were kind of first discovered on Instagram, the newest ones, the younger ones, which is interesting. And I think that's definitely a way that many, many more people see, particularly young artists, through Instagram. So absolutely.
I think you shouldn't underestimate too that the role that galleries play in artists' careers. So they don't just make sales, they do guide their careers and guide their pricing and stuff like that. So I mean, you've seen this, Instagram's one example, but also in China, a lot of young primary market artists sell directly onto the auction sector. So they bypass the galleries and they just sell at auction themselves on their own account, which is not the practice that you see very much in other markets at all. But you know, you can kind of, they do make money instantly, but their careers don't last necessarily the same time. So it's yeah, it does depend on, and it depends on how savvy the artists are. I mean, there's people that are businessmen like Damien Hirst and people like that that can do that selling at auction very, very well. But there's artists that need guidance for their careers, and this is where galleries play a very important role in the early stages, and kind of looking at the long-term development. They want them to have a career. Everyone wants a slow, steady. Nobody wants a quick burnout. Everyone wants a slow, steady career that lasts their lifetime and beyond.
And young artists sometimes doesn't have the money to pay the rent, so that's like the gallery.
Yeah. Next question. I think the lady with the white jacket. If you just get the microphone.
Oh, I can say
It's
so.
very exciting.
Hi, thank you so much for the insightful discussion. My name is Ray. I'm curious, you mentioned a lot about galleries and auction house. What hasn't been mentioned is nonprofit arts organization. And I wonder if you can talk a bit more about how that plays into the ecosystem in terms of supporting artists, and if art advisors actually work a lot with foundations or organizations.
Well, absolutely. For example, here in Miami, we have Locust Projects and Oolite Arts. I support them. I go to all their shows. It's important, particularly for young artists, the germination of their career. It's a great, great, great resource. And if they have ways that you can support them financially, I definitely encourage clients to do that. So it's definitely an important part of the world. And also, if they're really good, their sort of seal of approval on an artist will have a lot to do with the artist's career as well. So they have a function just like a museum that way.
And we do, I mean, it's not in the art market report, but I've done some research with UBS as well on the roles of different institutions. We did a cities report that is available online, I think, through UBS, that showed the value of different institutions, non-profits and for-profit galleries, and they kind of work together quite a bit. It's, you know, as well with galleries and in supporting careers. But that's getting away from the sales data and using exhibition data and the longevity of careers and who's most important in launching the careers of artists. And I have to say that I'm not kind of flying the flag again, but galleries are hugely important in the early stages. You know, the institutions tend to come along at a later stage, including the non-profits, but galleries are really important. They take probably the most risks of all the different institutions. But it is a very interesting ecosystem, but it goes beyond just looking at the sales figures, looking at the exhibition data. So that kind of research is interesting to look at if you're interested in that kind of area.
Hi, I have a collection that it started off in a local museum, and people liked it, and then people started having tours to see my artwork from all over the country. And then the major museum in Boston saw it, and now it's at their, now it's in there, it's on exhibition there. And we're gonna expand it next year. And now I'm saying, maybe I should do a show. Should I go from museums, 2 museums, one is a major museum. Should I go into gallery shows? Or should I just stay in, just do museums? I'm talking about establishing prominence.
Well, congratulations. That's
Thank you.
pretty great. So this is a collection of yours. You're not the artist, right? Or this, right? I mean, if you can get more museums interested, I would definitely do that. There may be galleries. I mean, there are many galleries like Gagosian that have shows that are really honestly like museum shows. But it sounds like you're doing pretty well with getting museums interested in the works that you collect. So
Stephanie usually goes the other way around.
yeah.
Yeah, but I suppose it depends what your objectives are as well. If you have commercial objectives, or if you're trying to playing the longer term value.
I mean, a provenance in a museum is probably the golden way to go for me. I mean, museums are the ones that are, I think, probably the most important step in an artist's career, which is why they want their works to be in museums. So that sounds wonderful. Keep doing that.
Any other questions at the moment?
Thank you for this talk. It's really great and such an important conversation. I'm very curious about how you see the high net worth individuals who are very prolific collectors like Broad and you know, Perez and all of these individuals who are creating their own museums. Do you see that to continue? Even all around the world, it seems like China, collectors are making their own museums. Is that continuing?
It certainly is, and there's actually a colleague of mine, Olav Velthus, is coming out with a new report on private museums soon. But it is really expanding, and it's fantastic. I think that's a fantastic thing to see because, you know, people have such big collections, but they live in limited spaces. Even the wealthiest people have a limited space. So to share things with the public, there's such a public good aspect. So many positive externalities come from having artworks on view. So I think it's a hugely important thing. And it is, it was mainly China and places like that, Asia, where all these private museums were developing. But I know it is a constant trend here as well. So that definitely is. And I think it's a hugely positive thing. I don't know if you'd agree.
It's so funny because on Wednesday I was with a client walking around, and he identified a number of works that he was really interested in, and everything was on reserve for a museum. And he got, oh my God, these museums, he said they just take all the work and then they put it away and you don't get to see it. And that's not completely true, but the idea of a small private museum kind of takes care of that a little bit too. You know, you've got here De La Cruz and Marty Margulies and Espacio 23, and there's so many of them. And it gives you kind of like another fun venue to go to. This is what I see as important. If it's, you know, becoming an actual museum is not easy. So a lot of them are just sort of, these are my collections. But it does give people another opportunity to see something else. And I don't think that's a particularly bad thing.
And also geographically speaking, quite often we simply don't have the great tradition and infrastructure of publicly funded museums. I mean, if you look at countries like Indonesia, for example, or India, there are very few publicly funded art museums, and that's where private collections kind of can jump into the gap and play a very important function inside the market. Any further questions? No? Well, then I wanted to thank Claire and thank Lisa very much, and thank you for coming. The talk will be available on our website and will be sent out to you. I just wanted to draw your attention to the Nova and Positions sector at the fair. They're sort of over there at the south side, kind of furthest from here. Those are galleries who really focus on young artists, on emerging artists, and that's where you can kind of make discoveries. And please do talk to the gallerists. They really do want to speak with you. Thank you very much for coming, and thank you to Emily for convening us all here.